In this mini lecture, we're going to begin talking in chapter 3. I'm going to actually break this down into two different mini lectures. One, we're just going to talk about cultural stuff, and then in the second mini lecture, we're going to talk about speaking ethically and thinking critically. So those are the three big learning objectives in chapter 3. I'm going to, as I said, break down the mini lectures, but this is all going to be in one PowerPoint in D2L for you to look at. So three different ways that they break this down. One, when we think of ethical speaking, there are many factors that go into place. Culture is one of them. Also, speaking ethically and thinking critically. So let's just start with culture. In the text, they break this down into different areas. So, attuning yourself to differences. How comfortable are you talking to people of different cultural backgrounds? And we'll find out in a minute that's more than just ethnicity and nationality. Reflecting on cultural values, how you're shaped by your cultural values, how we all have different learning styles, different cultural identities. On page 39 of the text, there's a little self-assessment that you're welcome to take just to see how comfortable you are when we think about culture and speaking. So let's start with the first area. So attuning yourself to differences. Why are we even talking about this? Why are we bringing this up? Well, we know that according to the Census Bureau, U.S. is composed of 5 primary ethnic groups. We have white, Hispanic, African American, Asian American, and Native American. And that's not everybody. There's others that, do not make this top 5 list. We are going to be interacting with people who come from different cultural backgrounds than we do, have different cultural values, beliefs. And what we don't want to be is called ethnocentric, where we think that our culture is the best and only way to be and that everybody else is just wrong. You can certainly live your life like that, but you're going to find yourself having some difficulty interacting with people as you move through life. So one, it's okay that there's differences. As a matter of fact, it's a great value to have whenever we're looking at, different ways of approaching jobs and decisions and interacting with people. Differences aren't all bad. Assessing your understanding of cultural diversity. Well, are you prepared? How do you feel? Again, you can look at this quiz on chapter 39. Different people have different comfort levels in talking to people who are different than them. And, are you aware of some of the differences? Do you want to become aware? And I think that is the big point right there. Thinking about, wow, this is an opportunity for me to learn. I tell my students every semester, I usually have students who are high school seniors, and as my kids are kind of a similar age, I've had students who, that I know from their schools, and I have said to them that, them deciding in their senior year to take some classes at HACC is a really smart thing to do, and that one of the nice things is that you have an opportunity here at HACC because of the diversity of our campus, and by diversity I mean more than just race and nationality, to be able to interact with people who are maybe a different age than you, maybe a different socioeconomic status background than you are coming from, and that when you go off to that nice little 4-year school, you're probably going to have a lot of people in your classes that look and think a lot like you do. And at HACC, you have an opportunity to learn about some more of those differences because you're going to be exposed to them more. So, especially in Com 101, there's an opportunity because of speeches to really be exposed to some different ideas. And, in my world, being exposed to different ideas is actually a good thing. Culture. What do we mean by culture? Culture is not something you're just born with. It's not like you're born and you just know what your culture is. Culture is learned throughout your life, and it can change throughout your life. You may move to different areas. Maybe some of you have lived in different areas. When I was born and raised near Pittsburgh and then moved to North Jersey, culture shock. That was not, there was just a lot of differences between the area of Pittsburgh and North Jersey. So you have this, shared system of beliefs and knowledge, and then there may be some co-cultures within that. These are members of the same general culture, but who differ in some ethnic or sociological way from this larger culture. And then within that, so you may have these little co-cultures, and then we have marginalized groups. These are groups whose members feel like outsiders. Through history, there have always been marginalized groups. I remember having a conversation with a student. I said something about women voting. I said, well, women never used to be able to vote. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah. There's all different marginalized groups through history. We certainly have that now. And so being aware of that and being in tune to that as you are creating a speech is going to be something that's going to be helpful for you. Just quickly, I want to go through this. So when we think about marginalized groups, and we're in these groups that are trying to reach their goals relevant to the dominant culture, there are some different approaches they can take. One, they can be very passive. They're really not doing anything. Always up to a very aggressive approach. And then in the middle is this assertive approach. And the assertive approach, the best way that I can link to that, if we think about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement and the actions that he took to try to improve the way that people were treated. He was not taking an aggressive approach. He was using the power of language to influence the dominant culture and doing it in a way that he, of course, wanted to have his thoughts and his beliefs appreciated, understood, and that there'd be changes, but he wasn't taking an aggressive approach. We've certainly seen places where there has been more of an aggressive approach, and it's those ones that we tend to develop feelings and thoughts and opinions about people who engage in those aggressive approaches. Now, honestly, that's usually not what most people do, but it is often what gets the most press, so we think that that's what people do. So just keeping that in mind, that there is a large continuum of the ways that marginalized groups can try to have their goals reached within the dominant culture. They're often doing this through language, through speech, and that different strategies can lead to different outcomes and different ways that we perceive. So when we talk about cultural values, again, we're not born with a culture, we learn a culture. In the United States, if you were born and raised here, we tend to be a very individualistic culture. We're a low context culture. We have low context communication. That means that we tend to be very direct, approach the problem head on, get to the root of the problem. Versus if you have someone who was born in a culture that was much more collectivistic, as in many countries in Asia, they tend to have very high context communication, which means they like to avoid confrontation, saving face, being less direct in their communication. And so if we have two people from two very different types of cultures communicating together, there's all kind of problems from misunderstanding. So being aware of that is something that is always important. If you're interested in differences between with intercultural communication, we have a course that, and it does actually meet a diversity requirement. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you might want to consider that course. Understanding cultural identity. We think of culture, we think of race, we think of nationality. A culture is much more than that. Gender or sex, although gender is a cultural term. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus, vice versa. The differences in gender communication is huge. Age, if you interact with somebody who's much older than you, if you're talking with a grandparent, a great-grandparent, you'll notice that there are interaction styles that are different. Of course, race and ethnic identity. Socioeconomic status, that's another way that we identify ourselves as belonging to a certain culture. So culture is not just about race, it is not just about nationality. Learning styles. We all learn differently. We all listen differently to information. Some of us are more visual learners. The reason that this is included in here is that as a speaker, you want to think about learning styles. You can never get, everybody in your audience, but you want to think about that as you're thinking about your language choices, as you're thinking about your visual aid, as you're thinking about how to structure your speech. The most important part of your speech, the most important thing for you to think about as a speaker is your audience. And so the last point I want to talk about is just acknowledging that all cultures do not share the same communication rules. There are differences. So we want to try to avoid having these expectations based solely on our own culture, that we're all different, and that's okay. And it's actually wonderful to embrace those differences. And sure, are we going to make mistakes along the way? You bet. But there are opportunities to learn also. So making just a commitment as you're taking this course and you're developing speeches and you're developing listening skills, that this is an opportunity for you to think about this life in the age of multiculturalism and globalism. It's not going away. We may want to think America first, but you know what? We live in a globalized world, and the internet has allowed us to communicate in ways that we have never been able to communicate before, and I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. So becoming aware of cultural differences as we communicate is going to be something that's going to be beneficial for you in many areas of your life. Okay, so hang tight. That's going to be the end of the first part of this, and then I'm going to do the second part about speaking ethically and listening critically.